questions throughout this presentation, just let me know, chat or through chat, or just chime in. So this workshop is going to cover the writing process overview, writing and organizing essays, and using sources responsibly. So it's really, this one is really helpful, I think, for people who have not had a writing class in a while, or not at all, you know, on the college level, and just need a refresher. It's really, you know, a lot of it's very basic, but it's good reminders to have as you go into core, Skylar, and as you go into comp, Shauna. So, and I, you know, just had to add this cute little graphic here, the eternal struggle getting stuff from here to here.
That's what it looked like this morning for me, so.
Oh no. Already.
Yes.
All right, yeah, the struggle is real for a lot of people, so don't feel alone. So you're probably familiar with this little writing process graphic. You've seen it in school before, even as far back as elementary school, right? But it stays the same no matter what level you're on. So pre-writing is the generation of ideas. Drafting is actually putting those ideas on paper or in Microsoft Word or whatever you do. Revising, because a rough draft is not your final draft, or it shouldn't be your final draft. Some people, I think, use them both interchangeably, but shouldn't be the case. So revising and editing involve making changes to that draft, that first draft. Revising involves content, content changes on the paragraph or entire paper level, kind of global level. And then editing involves proofreading and correcting spelling and grammar errors. And then finally, publishing your final draft, or turning in your final draft, creating your final copy. So we're going to look at the first one, pre-writing strategies. So there are 4 that I love to recommend to my students and use when someone's got writer's block. So you can, you know, if your class is giving you a prompt, you can use pre-writing to write ideas down about the prompt. If it doesn't give you a prompt, so if you are allowed to choose your own topic, you can even brainstorm for topics, which Shauna will probably remember in class last term, we did that in this form. So this is listing, right? So we did a paper on proposing a solution to a problem. That was our research paper. And I always allow, or usually allow, my students to write about what they want to write about, what they choose to write about, with certain caveats. But what we did in class was we divided problems that we see in the world, or problems that we see around us, into 4 different categories. So we divided them up into the regional, or I'm sorry, whoops, let me go back. We divided them up into the community level, or like your school, your job, the very local, closest levels to you, and then the regional state level. So these were some of the problems that my students just chimed in with, right? And we made a list of all of them. And then the national level, and then the global level. So finding something to write about if you don't have a prompt given to you by your instructor, this is really helpful in sorting through some of the different ideas that you can choose from. So the next one you've probably seen before. This is called clustering. And if we were writing a paper or, pre-writing, after being given a prompt on the writing process, right? We're going to write a paper about the writing process, write about writing. So the writing process would be in the middle. And then all of your different sub and sub categories would branch off of that middle idea. So this is just a graphic organizer or concept maps, and they call them this in core.
Critical
So
thinking.
I'm sorry?
Critical thinking, mind mapping.
Critical thinking, yes, mind mapping. They use these a lot in all the different core classes too, so just be ready. So yeah, the writing process, we go to pre-writing, right? And then off of pre-writing branches off the different subcategories of pre-writing, right? Pre-writing research. And then we have publishing, proofreading, revision, etc. So all of these have ideas branching off of them, and that's just to get the creative juices flowing, to get your ideas organized. And if you don't want to use something, you don't have to, right? You can always X out one of the boxes or circles. So we used to, in my English comp classes, have an appointed time to practice free writing. Free writing is a great way if you have writer's block or struggling to put ideas down on paper. It's writing without pausing for a predetermined amount of, and I like how this puts it, time, a predetermined amount of words, or a predetermined amount of angst. So normally we would, in class, I would set a timer for 5 minutes and give my students just a broad topic, like nursing school or parenting, or whatever it is, fill in the blank. And then they would use that word or prompt and just write for 5 minutes without pausing and without worrying about grammar, spelling, anything like that. And then once you've completed your free writing, you can highlight ideas that are important that you want to take away from the free writing. Because usually when you're free writing, you're going to come up with something that you think, oh, that's useful. The rest of it might not be. But so this person has highlighted key ideas and created an action plan based on that. So this is not for writing a paper per se, it's more for free writing about some classes someone would like to teach, right? You can also, if you're struggling for content ideas, ask yourself the journalistic questions. So that is the 5 W's and the H, right? The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how. So ask those questions about your topic and answer them. And you may have to do some research to answer them, but the idea is to get as much information down on paper as possible so you can generate content for your paper and weed out what you don't need. Okay, so this is the basic structure of an essay, the way it's organized. And you're probably familiar with 5-paragraph essay, the basic one that you learn all the way back from, before middle school. So not all papers are going to be, or not all essays are going to be your standard 5-paragraph essay, but they, ways follow this same basic structure. You're going to have an introduction with the thesis statement. You're going to have body paragraphs. You're going to have some sort of conclusion that, wraps everything up and draws everything to a close without stopping your paper here, you know, at the body paragraph 3. So thesis statements. We want to talk about these for a minute. They're the most important part of your paper because they are the controlling idea of your paper in one sentence generally. So they tell your reader what your paper will be about, makes a claim that others may either agree or disagree with in most cases, if, you know, obviously if it's an argumentative essay. It is a statement rather than a question, written in your own words, not in a quotation, and it generally appears at the end of your introduction. So your thesis statement will, you know, I almost always tell my students to put theirs at the end of their intro. And then the rest of your, the body paragraphs and the conclusion are going to support that thesis statement in some way. So the do's and don'ts, or the don'ts rather, write statements, not announcements. So we want to avoid thesis statements that start out with the subject of this paper will be, this essay is about, in this essay I want to express, etc. That's not the most effective way to write a thesis statement. We also don't want to put in first person pronouns. So I want to talk about, my opinion of fast food restaurants is, I want to explain, I'm going to prove, right? We don't want I statements. It's already, as I tell my students all the time, you know, that's just redundant. It's obvious that it's you, for one, and it's obvious that it's what you believe if you're arguing it. So there's no need to say it. It's redundant at best. And we just also, especially if it's an academic essay, do not want to use first person ever, if it is an academic essay. First person and APA style highly discourages students from using first person pronouns. You also want to avoid thesis statements that are too broad. And women are very different. Well, you could write a whole book about that, right? So maybe narrow down your topic to a few of the most important ways that they're very different, right? Avoid statements that are too narrow as well. So in Canada, a person must be 18 years old in order to vote in the federal election. A fact doesn't really argue anything, and it's also not, it's not broad enough to actually write a paper about, an entire paper. So you also want to focus on one idea. Group work has many advantages, but at the same time it brings many difficulties, right? We want to talk about the advantages or the difficulties, not in one paper. So one of the first steps you can take after you've done your pre-writing, you can use the information that you've gathered to create an outline. And Skylar asked a question. Hold on one second. As we venture through the Western Hemisphere's culture of Japan, the food, jobs, and lifestyles. So that could be turned into a thesis statement. Absolutely. It is more of a, it's an incomplete thought. So let's look at that really fast. So like I said before, we don't want to use first person pronouns. So we, you would want to take that out. So you might say something like the Western Hemisphere culture of Japan has interesting food, jobs, and lifestyles, you know, or something like that. You want it to be a complete sentence. You don't want it to have first person pronouns, and you want it to be a statement. And so then, yes, one body paragraph, you could talk about the food. In another body paragraph, you could talk about the jobs. In another body paragraph, you could talk about the lifestyles, right? And then write a conclusion, and you would have your paper. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So, so creating an outline, we looked at our graphic organizer of an essay back here, right? So this is just an outline form of that same idea. So the introduction, and I usually don't tell my, some English teachers, including some I had in school, they want you to write this really formal outline with like Roman numerals and capital and lowercase letter. I don't do that. I don't even know if I remember how to do it anymore, honestly. I usually write more of an informal alphanumeric, is probably the best way to describe this one. So you want your introduction, that's going to be your one. And then usually in an introduction, your teachers will tell you want a hook to start off with, right? To bait your readers into reading what you have to say. You don't want to bore them from the get-go. And then give some sort of a background information and context leads into your thesis statement at the end of the intro. So that'll be your essay's controlling idea. And then you have body paragraph 1 with supporting details. So each paragraph will contain one idea that contributes to the thesis or supports it in some way. For Skylar's example, right, if we're talking about the culture of Japan and its food, what were the three? Let me look, hang on.
It was the food, jobs, and lifestyle.
Yeah, so paragraph 1, you'd talk about the food. Body paragraph 2, you'd talk about the jobs. And then 3, you'd talk about the lifestyle, right? Keep them separated and organized. And then some sort of closure in the conclusion. You can summarize what you said before, call for some sort of action or other techniques. And basically your conclusions, it should answer the so what of the day. What was I supposed to get out of this? Why was this an important paper to read? So let's say we are writing a paper about how to cook spaghetti. So we want to fill this blank outline with actual information. So here's my intro paragraph. So the hook. There are a few things more satisfying to the taste buds than a heaping plate of spaghetti meatballs, right? That's immediately probably got your writer's attention. They're drooling. They want to read more, right? And then the lead into the thesis. How does that relate? How does the hook relate to the content of your paper? Many people think any spaghetti is good spaghetti. However, they are wrong, right? And then your thesis statement is your paper controlling idea. So truly delicious spaghetti is simple to make if the cook follows 3 simple rules, right? And then your paragraphs are going to support those 3 simple rules, right? So here we have, first, the sauce ingredients must be fresh. So ideally, your paragraphs will focus on one main idea that supports the thesis, and they will contain a topic sentence, right? So it's your topic sentence. It's kind of like the thesis statement of a paragraph, right? It tells you what the paragraph's going to be about. So then you support it with details. So what ingredients for the sauce? How do you find the fresh best ingredients. Why is it important? And then your topic sentence for the next paragraph. This has to do with the noodles. And then support that topic sentence with your instructions here, your details. And then finally, use the perfect spice combination for ultimate flavor and add it to the sauce, right? So then you would go into detail about what that perfect combination is, right? So now it's your turn. I want you to write a brief conclusion paragraph for the essay that we just looked at, the outline. So remember, a conclusion is one paragraph which is used to sum up and bring to a conclusion all of the ideas you have discussed during the body of the essay. They should not introduce any new information, right? It's just kind of summarizing and reiterating the importance and giving the paper satisfying closure, right? So I'll give you a couple minutes. You can type it in your Word on your computer. You can write it down on a piece of paper, whatever you want to do, and then we'll compare what you guys came up with, include this spaghetti cooking essay. All right, are we done or do we need another minute or two?
We could use another minute.
Okay.
Me too. Thank you.
All right, are we ready?
I think so.
All right, so Skylar, do you want to lead us off?
I can. Try not to laugh.
I will not. I can guarantee you, I've heard much worse.
So, unless the recipe is followed to taste, the spaghetti will not reach its max potential. The blending of spices in the sauce are to coat the noodles with or like a sheet, light and flowing. As the noodles, once prepared properly, is like the comforter as both lay on the taste buds, covering them with delightful protection, warming the soul. Proper ingredients and preparation will reach the deepest sensation, creating the best spaghetti anyone has ever enjoyed.
Nice, I like it. Very, lots of imagery there. All right, thanks. Yeah, and that's perfect. You covered all the main points, and just gave a concluding statement, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. All right. Shauna?
Mine is very short and not as colorful as that. You did a great job.
That's okay.
I said, time to strain your noodles and grab a plate. Place a good helping of noodles on your plate and cover with fragrant sauce.
Yeah, good.
Nice.
Yep. Perfect. So, you probably want to add a couple more sentences to that, but that's the general idea. Yeah, definitely. Vanessa, are you there? I noticed you joined.
Yeah, I kind of joined late, but I can read what I have. I'm not sure if that's what I'm hitting off.
Yeah.
Please. Once I have all my fresh ingredients for amazing spaghetti and meatballs, I let the smell take over my kitchen. When it comes to the noodles and sauce, you have to make sure it's at an equal ratio. Spaghetti is very quick but very satisfying.
Good. Yeah, so just kind of gave a final concluding thought and restated your thesis, right, in a different way. So,
right.
Perfect. Good job, guys. So that is basic essay writing in a nutshell. I mean, it's really not that difficult, except, I mean, the concept isn't difficult. The content is usually the most difficult part. But, I've seen a lot of students still struggle with the organization piece as well. So it never hurts to go back and review, all of these tips and tricks, and hopefully this has given you some good ideas for your own writing in school. So I'm going to move on now, do you guys have any questions, or are we good?
For the conclusion, normally is that with about 3 to 4 sentences or?
Yeah, I mean, generally a paragraph is 4. I usually use the rule of 4 for a paragraph, 4 sentences. So, but it really depends. I mean, if you've covered all your bases in 3, then I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, you didn't, you didn't write enough words in the conclusion, yeah, so generally short and sweet is best.
Okay, good.
All right, so we're going to move on to using sources responsibly, which I apologize, Shauna, you've already seen this in my class, so but it's really important information. So, and I had more issues with this in the past session than I have ever, in my time at Arizona College with people just not using sources responsibly. They're citing sources, not are using too many sources in their papers instead of their own thoughts and ideas. So I came up with this presentation to kind of go through with everyone and just to teach you how to use sources in a paper. Because if you know, it's one thing if you're writing about spaghetti, right? Or if you're writing about something you don't have to do research for. But if you're including other people's thoughts and ideas in your writing, then there are very strict guidelines you have to follow in order to maintain academic integrity. So we're going to talk about in this section of the workshop about plagiarism, and then the 3 ways that you can include sources in a paper: summary, paraphrase, and direct quotation. So first of all, how would you guys define plagiarism in your own words?
Pretty much just copying word for word from whatever source you use.
Okay. Partially, yeah. So if I copy word for word though, and I cite it and put quotations around it, it's not plagiarism, right?
Right.
When does it become plagiarism?
When you fail to give them credit.
I'm sorry, two people spoke at once and I didn't hear either one of you. So it becomes plagiarism when you try to pass it off as your own thoughts and ideas, right? Or if a reader, you know, even if you forget to include a citation, yeah, when you fail to give credit, using someone else's ideas or exact words and passing them off as your own, either intentionally or unintentionally. So there are, you know, several different ways you can accidentally and intentionally plagiarize. Usually when it's accidental, it's because you don't know how to paraphrase properly. And so you're looking at the original source while you write your paraphrase and using a lot of the same words and sentence structure, maybe just changing up a few words here or there, which is not paraphrasing, or at least properly. Forgetting to cite is another big one. So intentional plagiarism can include a number of different things. Self-plagiarism is a thing. So you can't use the same paper that you turned in for one class and turn it in to another class later. That is, it's called self-plagiarism. And unfortunately, I have dealt with that in the past. I taught a class at GCU a while back, and 2 students submitted papers to me that they had actually submitted to another professor the same semester, the same school, and it showed up in Turnitin, right? And then I had to unfortunately give them zeros on their papers because they had turned in the same paper twice to 2 different classes. Obviously, using pre-written papers that you find online is a big no-no. Having someone else write your paper for you, also a big no-no. And copying directly without quotations or citation, not good. So, mosaic plagiarism. So basically, when you commit this error, you are very close to the original source without being exactly like the original source. So it's almost like whenever you copy and paste and then you take words out of the original and change them to different words, or you move maybe a couple words around here and there, but it stays basically the same. So you see here the writer, the student writer here. This is their alleged, this is their attempt at a paraphrase of this source down here below. So you see all the parts that are underlined. Those are parts of the students' attempt at paraphrase that closely matched the original. So friendly Sioux were suddenly plunged into new conditions. Friendly Indians are suddenly plunged, and then we have condition here, right? Starvation, martial law on all their reservations, that's all also in the original source, right? So you can see, and then they haven't even tried really with this one. It's basically the same with a few differences here and there, right? So as you know, Arizona College uses the Turnitin feature. So this is what your paper is going to look like in Turnitin if you turn in something that is not properly paraphrased. Still going to show up as a match, right? Especially larger sections of your paper. And then that Turnitin match is reported to both the instructor and to you. So you can see your Turnitin usually, unless your instructor has it turned off. You can see what your percentage is. I actually allow my students to resubmit if their percentage is too high. But this is what we don't want to see, right? We don't want to see all these matches. And I'm not going to go into detail in this one, but it's just kind of the same. It's called patch writing. And, you know, it's basically patching two sources together the same way that you've done the first bad paraphrase. And that brings me to another topic, which is we don't want too much of our writing to be made up of outside sources. So you can cite your paper perfectly all the way through, right? But if you have if 50% of your paper is made up of quotations and outside sources, that's not going to fly, right, in academic environment. Usually teachers want you to aim for 20 to 25% max match of other sources. So that means about 80% of your paper is your own thoughts and your own ideas, and you're using the sources to support your ideas, not the other way around. So consequences. Does it matter if plagiarism is accidental or intentional as far as consequences go?
Sadly, no.
You're correct. Sadly, no. Has anyone accidentally plagiarized and learned the hard way?
I've definitely learned the hard way on that one. I'm not even gonna lie. Won't do it again, but I definitely learned the hard way and I got a 0.
Yep. So it's not something that schools take lightly, teachers take lightly. And it doesn't matter. For one, you should have been more careful, right? You should absolutely make sure that that your paper is citing all the ideas that are not yours. Second, there's no way to prove that it was unintentional, right? Like you could tell me that, but be lying through your teeth, right? So the easiest way is just to avoid it altogether. And you mentioned consequences, Vanessa. You got a 0 on your paper. And unfortunately, I've had to do that too. It's not a fun conversation to have, with a student, but it never happened again, after the student was made aware of the situation.
Yeah, now I definitely double check just to make sure. Now I'm like paranoid, like, okay, I know I use that, but I need to make sure that it's not plagiarized. So I definitely double check extra now.
That's good. Yeah, and you're probably most likely not going to get kicked out of school the first offense, but if you get written up, which you're supposed to be given called a PID form, progressive intervention discipline, for any instance of academic dishonesty. And, you know, those accumulate in your file, you could be kicked out if there are multiple incidents, right? So hurts your grade, hurts your student file. It, you know, you're under the magnifying glass, honestly, too. You know, it's harder to trust a student who has plagiarized. All right.
I'm kind of glad that was in high school. So ever again, but it's a little more, I wouldn't say lenient in high school, but still, like, you know, you're still pretty much learning on that part.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you don't want it to happen in college for sure. So avoiding plagiarism, because, you know, as fun as it is to talk about the bad, the negative, we want to avoid it using positive, healthy habits, right? So if we're doing things the right way, we don't have to worry about it. So some tips that I give my students: read and reread the original source until you're able to explain it to someone else in your own words. So if you read something, I mean, the point of using sources in your paper is to make you're learning in the process, right? You're doing research, you're finding all this cool info, you know, and if you're just finding a source to find a source, and not really truly understand what it's saying or how it relates to your paper, then that's a problem, right? So you want to be able to explain it to someone else, read it, reread it, put it down for a little bit, and then write about it or tell someone else about it. And chances are the structure and the wording is going to be very different from the original if you do it that way. Do not look at the original source while you are writing your paper. So that's why I recommend even, you know, stepping away for a bit. Read it, reread it, step away, turn it over, and don't look at it again. Use different sentence structure from the original, and that's usually going to be pretty easy if you do the first 2 bullet points. And this is important too. Even if it's someone else's idea that you've paraphrased, you still have to cite. So you're not just citing direct quotations, right? You're also citing, if it didn't come from your brain, you have to cite it unless it's, you know, common knowledge. And then cite as you write. So don't, you know, put your paraphrase in your paper and think, oh, I'll add that in later. I'm going to cite it later. Do it right then so you don't forget.
I have a question. So if we're paraphrasing and we don't have to cite it in, I guess, in the paragraph, or do we have to cite it in the paragraph, or we just cite it at the end?
Well, a citation is in your paper. A reference is at the end of your paper.
Okay, kind of like, now I wouldn't say like a footnote. I don't think they call it a footnote, but like, you know,
Reference.
so the citation would be that right after you put it and not in like parentheses.
Yes.
Or
yes, yeah. Wherever the information is used is where you'll put the citation, yeah, within your paper. The paragraph or sentence or whatever. So summary. A summary is a shorter version of the original source. So while a paraphrase is going to be about the same length as the original, usually 2 or 3 sentences, you know, up to maybe a small paragraph. A summary is just condensing a really long source into its bare minimum main points. So it's going to be in your own words. Use quotation sparingly. Only the main points. Summary should be objective. You don't want to put words in the author's mouth. No opinions of your own. Make sure it accurately represents the original idea, and you still do have to cite it, right? Even if it's a summary. And I actually have a hard stop at 6, so I'm going to move through all this. Oops. I will send you guys this slide presentation after we're done, so you'll have it to look at. So paraphrasing is roughly the same length as the original, puts up to several sentences in your own words, and with several or with different sentence structure from the original. And then you do want to include page and paragraph numbers in your citation. So for a summary, you don't do that because generally a summary is the whole, you know, a whole work with no real specific location that you're referring to. A paraphrase is a specific location, right? So we want to include that in there. And apparently I really liked the animation this because it keeps going over and over. All right, so here is an original paragraph, and just pretend that you're a student and you want to use this paragraph in your paper. Would one of you mind reading this out loud?
The feminization of clerical work and teaching by the turn of the century reflected the growth of business and public education. It also reflected limited opportunities elsewhere. Throughout the 19th century, stereotyping of work by sex had restricted women's employment. Job options were limited. Any field that admitted women attracted a surplus of applicants willing to work for less pay than men would have received. The entry of women into such fields, whether grammar, school, teaching, or office work, drove down wages.
Perfect. So are you going to be able to, after reading this one time, put all of that into a paraphrase?
Properly, no.
Right. No, probably not. And like you said, properly, no. You'll want to read it again, maybe again, right? And then make sure that you're, you know, retaining the information, understanding it, and that you're able to write it in your own words or tell it to someone else in your own words to where it doesn't follow the same sentence pattern, the same wording, etc. of the original. So your paraphrased version might look something like this. According to Nancy Wollock in Women in the American Experience, A Concise History, the feminization of jobs in the 19th century had two major effects: a lack of employment opportunities for women and inadequate compensation for positions that were available. Thus, while clerical and teaching jobs indicated a boom in these sectors, women were forced to apply for jobs that would pay them less than male workers were paid, right? So you can see the difference. This one's a little shorter, but roughly the same size, and it's the same ideas. You know, we don't leave anything out. So this would be an acceptable paraphrase of that original paragraph, right? You don't see the same sentence structure, the same words and phrases. It's perfect. And then finally, direct quotation. It is a word-for-word excerpt from the original source. So you always want to use quotation marks if it's a direct quotation. Don't use them very often. They should be used sparingly. Only when, you know, you just cannot say it any better than the original source. And also, it keeps your match percentage down as well.
What would be like a max for a 5-paragraph? Like, what would you recommend sparingly for a max?
Well, 20% of a paper, you know, a 5-paragraph essay is going to be what? Page and a half to 2 pages.
Yeah.
So what's 20% of that?
That'd be about a quarter to, well, a third to half.
Of a page?
Yeah. Would be a quarter.
Yeah.
So third.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So just kind of gauge it that way is what I would recommend. Don't use block quotations, right? Don't, especially in a smaller paper. You can use them in a big research paper, but you know, block quotations are when you use a quotation that's like 40 words or more. You format them differently, but you know, I really discourage my students from using those just because they take up way too much. Direct quotations should also never stand alone as a sentence or begin a sentence. So you always want to have some sort of a lead in, which is what we call the quote sandwich method. So we have the sandwich here. The top piece of bread is your intro to the quotation or the source material. So you can say something like, according to Twain, Mark Twain claims on page 32, Twain states, that just do something to introduce what you're about to include from the source. Then the filling of like the deli meat here is the actual quotation itself, right? It's the source material itself. And then finally, the bottom piece of your bread is your explanation. Why is the quotation important? How does it support your thesis, relate to the rest of your paper? It may not be as obvious to your audience as it is to you why that quotation is there, right? So an example here at the bottom, according to Plato, so we have our introduction to the quotation. Wise men talk because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something. All right, so there's the meat, the actual source material. So why is it there? Explain it. Plato's point is that people should always think before they speak. This is important to remember when communicating in any situation, whether talking to parents or chatting with peers, as speaking without thinking can lead to saying something one does not mean or will regret. Right, so we have it all packaged up nice and organized. But we don't ever want to start a sentence with a quotation. All right, so we're not going to do this part just because we're running out of time, but I do want to see if you guys have any questions or comment or anything else that you'd like to